Hello and welcome to Bandwidth Conversations, a podcast that finds out about the stories and journeys of creatives and rock stars of life. My guest today has been many things. Among them, and in no particular order, he is a New College Oxford alumnus, a school teacher, a DJ for Classic FM, a national heartthrob, an ambassador for Mencap, an older brother to an amazing young man with autism and global development delay, a British diplomat, and a traitor. This is the stuff you will find in the blurb on the back cover of a twisty plotted novel. All will be revealed in this podcast. I am really looking forward to talking today to my guest, Alexander Dragonetti. Thank you so much for being here, Alexander.
No, thanks so much for having me on.
Your mother is an artist. Your father is Italian. That makes it sound like it's a full-time job being Italian. Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born on the Isle of Wight. My family comes from there, but back in the day, I'm half Italian by blood, culturally very English, as you can hear from my accent. I wish I had more gesticulation or more cultural heritage built in. As I say, I grew up in probably 7 or 8 different parts of the UK. I wonder if that's the reason that I ended up going overseas for 10 years, because there's nowhere specifically that feels like I'm rooted there. But now London is my home.
When you were 7 years old, your brother James came along. Could you tell us about James?
Yeah, I mean, he's a fantastic guy. People do say this about family members, but he truly lit up rooms. I remember I used to go to summer camps each year, and I was one of the carers for about 5 years running. And I used to look after somebody else, so not my brother. My brother would be looked after by a fellow volunteer. And my brother would jump out of the car. It was probably the most exciting week of the year for him. I was there to help in the background, and he'd just run off. See you later, Alex. He was the rock star there. Everybody was like, oh my God, James has arrived here. And people would flock around him. He had this incredibly magnetic quality. He lit up everywhere he went. It's tricky, the flip side of that. It's easy to talk about the positives, but it becomes harder as you get older. I mean, kids with learning disabilities, what was previously called special educational needs, when they're young are easy to understand. They're children and you can act with them like children. And the world tends to adapt better in that case. As you approach late teens or toward adult years, the world changes in the way it engages with you. You are an adult, but a slightly unusual one. And that's hard.
Was he always aware of that change?
I think 2 things. I think by the time he died, I think it was becoming more obvious, but I don't think it had completely hit home yet. He noticed people being off or not kind, and he took that to heart a lot. It really mattered to him. That said, I think my family did an incredible job of keeping up a theatre set around him. We put an enormous volume of time and effort and the money that we had into keeping his life as stable as possible, including his education, where we've had to fight a number of times to get the right care for him, making sure he had a good friendship group and making sure he went to the right after school clubs, and all these places were safe and they were caring. But that takes an enormous volume of effort to keep that theatre set up, and pieces of it were falling down with more regularity and it took more effort to put them up. By the time he died, I think we were definitely getting towards a turning point.
Global development delay, I mean, it covers an array of things. What did that mean for him?
I'm an ambassador for Mencap, and they would probably take my role away for saying this because you're not meant to, but it is easier to understand as a young child. My brother never learned to dress appropriately for the weather. He didn't really speak until he was about 7. There were a whole load of situations that he just couldn't really read. He made incredible progress from 7. By the time he died, he could understand everything and he had a pretty full vocabulary. He could hold a completely fluent conversation. He had, like any child growing up, such incredible passions in life. It's just that his passions were things that were slightly different. He loved building towers out of Connect 4 counters or Lego or whatever. And he'd build them higher than you or I could ever manage. And then he'd knock them down and then he'd start again. Or you'd end up watching The Incredibles on loop. He was incredibly passionate and cared deeply about things, just not things that you or I might obviously recognize.
Right. And I wonder, as a sibling, you can either feel sidelined and feel resentful, or you can become part of the caring team. And it sounds, from what you're saying, you embraced the caring team side of things.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly hard for parents. I mean, being a parent's not an easy job at the best of times, is it? Kids don't always appreciate the efforts their parents do go to, which is hard. And that's doubly true if As a parent, you really do have to make a choice about where you put your time and attention. And it's absolutely right to put it where the greatest need is. What a tough position. That doesn't detract from the fact that as a sibling, it does, I think, have some impact on you. And I think your framing is right. You probably either detach a bit and maybe play up, or alternatively, you become part of the home team and the solution. And I definitely did the second one. I saw myself as absolutely part of the team from a very young age, which has its own implications, I think. And I saw absolutely a future when my parents would become older and I would become responsible for my brother as he grew up and then as he became an adult. That would have been the greatest privilege of my life. I was totally clear that that was what I was on this earth to do. And it's a funny way, maybe, to phrase it, but that is a privilege to have such a clear purpose in life, to know exactly why you're on the earth and to know exactly what you will sacrifice for. It's incredible, actually, what people can do when they put their minds to it, when they know why. And so that was it. I was very lucky. I had this purpose and I knew that's what my life would be for. And therefore, it's my responsibility to become infinitely strong, to test myself in every available way to make sure that I wouldn't be found wanting when the time came that he needed me for something. That drove me through my academic work, but also at school, and then through the uni, and then my choice of jobs. I went to work in teaching in one of London's probably most difficult schools for the full-time policeman, and similarly went to work in Palestine, Gaza, and the West Bank, Pakistan. And some of those were after he died, but the chip doesn't disappear.
No.
You grow up with this thing that you must become invincible. And that's a great strength in one way, but it's also, as with anything that you've evolved into to meet a very specific need in a very specific time, it can also be a weakness when you don't need to be that person. So I'm lucky, but it's also been a process of adapting out of being that guy, at least at times as well. That was probably a bigger answer than you asked for. I'm sorry.
No, you've explained that really, really well. Was it expected that he was going to die so young?
No, not at all. His death was completely unexpected. It was just one of those flukes. So it was an enormous shock to everybody.
I'm so sorry, Elliot.
I'm not saying there's a better or worse scenario, really. I think if you know that somebody has a serious condition or something, then that's awful in its own way. There's no sense that I'm weighing one or the other, except to say that for me, in my own personal circumstance, it was incredibly sad to lose somebody so important to me so suddenly. The world sort of goes from colour to monochrome.
Yes, I do some work with a charity called Child Bereavement UK, and they support families when a child grieves or a child dies. And it's just the worst of all circumstances. So whether you're a sibling or a parent, it's just all the wrong way round, isn't it?
It is all the wrong way around. That's absolutely right. And there's so much of a sense of the story that hasn't then happened.
Yeah.
It's incredibly sad.
I was actually really taken by the fact that, because I've looked up Mencap and all the different amazing things that Mencap does. And one of those things is taking children away from families to give them a holiday for a week a year, and to give those families who are carers a break. Whereas you actually actively chose to go on those holidays.
Yeah.
So I think that says a lot about you.
Yeah, it's the least I could do. Life is not easy. It's just not. Being different and having learning disability is definitely a form of different. And that's hard. And it's hard for all of us to engage with people who are different. And it's hard for those kids as well to find their tribe and to find a world that makes sense around them. And so if I can do anything to be part of that solution, then that's incredibly important to me. So I believe in the cause. I was also there for my brother. It was local to us. So it was nice for him to have me around in the background if he ever needed me. I also think you get an enormous amount out of that yourself. The majority of people that I worked with were profoundly affected by working with people who require your support. It's an incredibly important role you play and you take it with great responsibility. You can't afford to have ego or to worry about your own needs, really, or to try and pretend to be something you're not. You are at the service of somebody else. And that's a very powerful role to play in life, full stop, really, especially to those who have a good reason to need that support. So I think that's a real privilege. I think the word a lot of people would use is as humility. You gain through that.
There was an organisation founded by this guy, Elliot Portnoy, at New College, and called Kids Enjoy Exercise Now. I started the rowing program for some of the children with special needs in the area. And you're quite right. What you give, you get back a million times over. Not that you're doing it to get that back, but that's just what happens.
Just one more thought on what you just said quickly is we're in a society that values sort of fun and an experience. That's a good thing. I'm super pro that. But I think sometimes we can underestimate the power of purpose. If you know what you're doing and why, it sort of trumps everything.
Yes. You go to New College, you study history. Why did you choose New College and history?
It's funny, actually, because at school I did physics, chemistry, maths, and history. So I wasn't like an obvious humanities candidate. I think from memory, I went to a science open day at Cambridge and thought it was a bit weird. And so I chose Oxford for humanities. I wish I had a better story than that. I was deeply passionate about history. And then I picked the subject that that was a humanities subject.
Did it end up being a good choice for you?
I love the stories in history, and I love the fact that it's about people. And that makes it really resonant because you tend to look at the events that people care about, and therefore it's about people's emotions and their hopes and dreams. And they're the areas I ended up going deeper into when I studied at New College. So I did a lot of medical history, again, hopes and dreams of until about 1900. You're probably worse off in a hospital than you are outside it. But obviously, people have always cared whether they get better or they don't, quite obviously. And that's what makes the topic so compelling. And I really liked architectural history as well, because you can walk around London and look at the Wren or the sort of Hawksmoor, Vanbrugh city churches. And again, it's real, it's there, and you can look at the stories behind them. I really enjoyed that very tangible, very people-focused history. So that's part of it. I think in another life, if I'd known it existed, I'd have applied for politics and history or something like that, or maybe PPE, because in a sense, that's a form of history that's much more current.
And how did you enjoy your time at New College?
I don't know if there's that type 1 or type 2 fun where you're like, you remember something incredibly fondly and you almost overwrite the memory of it. But as far as I remember, a little bit far ago now, at the time of my life there, I loved it. And I really heavily went into the non-academic stuff. So I was on the committee of something like 7 societies when I was there. And I spent 6 out of 7 days a week doing society work. I have no idea why.
What kind of societies?
Goodness, I was social secretary of the Italian Society, which pretty much consisted of non-stop parties. I was president of the Punting Society for no obvious reason. And we did the inaugural Cambridge-Oxford punting race. I was on the skiing committee.
Oh, my goodness.
I used to be co-editor for a small newspaper, just a whole load of stuff. I don't really know why I did it, but I just loved being involved with stuff. The thing I loved most, I think, about New College and probably Oxford in general is everybody is pretty passionate about what they're doing. So if you sit next to somebody for dinner and they're like, I don't know, they do computer science, way out of my range. If there's somebody who's passionate on something, you can listen to them talk about it for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and it's super interesting because they're passionate about it. And I think that makes a huge difference. I love that people had passions. Sometimes they're academics, sometimes other stuff, but almost everybody had drive and passion. I thought that was super cool.
Yeah. And then after New College, you went to do Teach First?
Yes.
And that's a 2-year program, isn't it? Were you doing that alongside your diplomatic exams or Foreign Office exams?
Yeah, well spotted. I did my diplomatic exams after uni and I got a place at the Foreign Office. And then I also got a place to Teach First. So I deferred for 2 years to do teaching. And at the end of that 2 years teaching, the Foreign Office came back to me and they said, well, look, that's 2 years. You either take your place or you lose it. So I took it. To be honest, teaching was so hard. I don't know if I could have stuck it for a 3rd year.
I was a teacher. I was a maths teacher. So unlike you, I was teaching 1 subject and you were teaching 7. I was also teaching at Eton, where if they thought they were behaving badly, they really weren't behaving that badly. Whereas you were in a school in North London, I think, where the vast majority of students were socially disadvantaged. Was that how you would describe it?
Yeah, from memory, it's something like 70-80% on free school meals, an indicator of social deprivation. Similarly, 80% with English as an additional language, being their first language, was something else, which sometimes can make it harder to access the curriculum. Lots of complexity, a full-time policeman at the school because...
Stuff happened.
Well, bad behaviour, but also tracking into breaking the law. Kids wouldn't take certain buses in the area in case they crossed into other postcodes. It was tough. And of course, there's me coming from Oxford, in a suit. So, hello, kids. I'm here to do some sort of dangerous minds thing where everybody will suddenly realize how valuable education is and what opportunity we can work to together. And, whatever. It's clearly you get disabused of that extraordinarily quickly. To your point, I think all teaching is hard. It just is. Whether it's at Eton or anywhere else, the pressures you will have faced are probably slightly different, but the expectations there will be very high. The parents, I suspect, will be probably very focused on outcomes and probably under pressure to deliver great outcomes for kids. I had a lot of that, but also probably some different bits as well, with more around the behavior side. So I think teaching is just a hard job, if I'm honest.
Well, I think going back to your point earlier about purpose is that the good thing about teaching is you absolutely know what your purpose is. Whether you can do it or not is another matter. And I remember going into teaching and thinking, well, I'm going to be the equivalent of Mr. Chips and I'm going to change people's lives. I would have absolutely drowned if I had gone to the school that you taught at because I've got no boundaries.
Oh, no, I drowned as well.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Well, I don't have boundaries, or I think I have boundaries, and then I'm inconsistent. So, I would have done everything wrong. Can you just give an example of reality versus expectation?
I taught A-level history, and I don't think we got a kid into Oxbridge, I don't know, for years, 10 years plus or something like that. I don't know, maybe longer. And we had a candidate who was super smart. And we did one-on-one tuition and ran all the way up to, it puts a huge amount of sort of resource and time in, and he right. And then he didn't turn up for the exams. I don't know what happened. Just went off grid.
To this day, you don't know what happened to him.
Yeah, don't know why.
Wow.
You will have kids that you've built up this really strong relationship with, and then suddenly they'll turn. It's tough. There are no guarantees in what is a tough and quite chaotic environment. If your lessons are disciplined and tight and you have good behavior management, you have a better chance. If you invest in kids and really show that you care, very high support, very high challenge, you need both, you stand a better chance. But there are no guarantees, is what I learned. And over time, things would go right more often than they went wrong. By my second year, I was a much better teacher and I had much better outcomes than my first year. It's a progression. It's slow and it's uneven. Sometimes it reverses for periods. As you said, there is no filmic quality to it where it starts bad and then there's a Damascene moment and everybody's like, wow, this education thing, this is the thing. It didn't really work like that, at least for me.
Well, I think it's hard.
It is hard, but ultimately enormously rewarding. By the end, I think I had a GCSE class get grades on average 2 years above predictions. I guess I'm just keen to make the point. It wasn't all a disaster. It also worked, but it was still hard. I think the key change probably came around 2/3 of the way into my first year, maybe sort of almost into my second, whereby once you've taught the curriculum once, you become much more comfortable with it and you can edit it as you go. And I also came to this realization of this incredibly important high challenge, high support. So if you just give high support, which is where I started, people just need to be understood and feel loved and it'll be fine. And they just take advantage, quite frankly, become quite lazy. If you just go for the high challenge, heavy punishment, worse, shouting at kids, which is never a good idea, they will just become deeply disengaged and they will not care. And there is absolutely no punishment available in my armory that actually makes any difference. If you keep a kid for 2 hours after school detention, well, it's a warm, relatively safe space and they may not have that to go home to. It's not really a problem anyway. You have to do both. You have to do high support if you keep them over break time. It's because you're understanding where they're coming from, where their life is coming from. You go to see if they're doing a school play or something in the afternoon or evening. You are there to watch it. You are there to listen to them in times of need because somebody in the playground has done something awful, or a girl they fancy or the boy they fancy, something awful's happened, or whatever it is. You are there. And at the same time, if they step out of line, then you come down like a ton of bricks on that as well. And I think if you get that right for long enough, and I got it right some of the time for a reasonable amount of time, the thing that kids take away is that you actually care. You care enough to invest in them both ways. You care enough to support, but you also care enough not to let them get away with stuff that they shouldn't be doing. Your job as an adult is to make the long-term short-term for them. Long-term, it will impact their chances of getting a good job. It will impact their chances of being able to engage in society. So you make that short-term now through whatever it is, detentions, or getting their parents to sit next to them in class, or whatever it takes. And I think kids, if you do that consistently, realize that that is a form of care. And they, however, grudgingly accept that you're doing it because you care, that you get it right all the time. And kids sort of understand that if you don't bother investing in them with support or consequences when they do stuff wrong, it's actually evidence of a lack of care. It's not evidence of being super cool.
That's fantastically explained and actually brilliant advice for young people going to start teaching. I'd imagine becoming a diplomat's a piece of cake after that. I mean,
Yeah. Honestly, teaching's the hardest job I've done. That may sound strange because, as I said, I worked in the West Bank or Gaza or in Pakistan or whatever. But the reason I say that is because I think jobs break down into 3 buckets. There's physical labor, which generally is hard, but at the end of the day, you sort of sleep well. And then there's intellectual labor where you burn a lot of brain energy and your brain can continue thinking in the evenings and at night. And that's tricky. And that's where a lot of us sit. And then you've got the emotional jobs, but those they never let go. There's a battery internally of emotion. And once that battery is drained, it takes a long time to recharge. And the thing about teaching is it drains that battery. For me, it did anyway, extraordinarily quickly, and it didn't recharge. And then once you're low, you don't respond as well as you can. You often react. You're not as emotionally intelligent as you should be, and the problems can compound. And that I didn't love, but I couldn't be at my best because I just didn't have the emotional battery to absorb what the kids were throwing at me. And it's often a reflection of the challenges they face. But I found that really hard, and kids will find your weak spots.
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sure you found the same. Kids would be like, we hate you, everyone hates you. And you're like, okay, that is something I'll have to live with. Or they'll be like, say you're ugly. And you're like, okay, well, my job is to teach, so that's cool. Or they'll be like, sir, you're a shit teacher. And that's what got me, because when I started, I was. And I was like, no, God, you're right. That really hurts. They'll just keep trying until they find the spot that gets you.
You switched jobs. That must be around about the time that you lost James.
That's right. So my brother died in the second year of teaching, right towards the end of it. And that period is for me a bit of a blur, if I'm honest. I went back to work afterwards, but
That's a lot to deal with your day-to-day work where you have to be 100%
very hard.
on top form and you're grieving and in shock.
Very hard to that emotional point, like how much battery anyone's got. Very, very hard. The main memory I have that period is the monochrome nature of it. Nothing means anything. This sense where everything is just put into grey relief because the size and scale of the thing that's happened to you is so large that everything else becomes very, very small in comparison. For some time, the colour in life does fade. That final bit of teaching after my brother died was very, very hard. It was an odd period because I then had 3-month period after finishing where you got the summer holidays. I went off to Italy and sat in my own world for a little bit. And then you come back to this completely different thing because you walk into the Foreign Office on King Charles Street and Whitehall, this incredibly grand building, and you get your first job in a brown envelope that you have to unseal. It's just different from the E-shaped concrete block in North London up near Edgware Road Estates. So very, very different.
Yes. And maybe being thrown into something new distracts a little bit from the pain that you're going through. I mean, it's not something you ever get over. You just get used to it, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I'm no expert here, but I have put a significant amount of time into trying to process it and figure it out. And I think the word you use is exactly right, distracting. You can do things that move your mind elsewhere, but the whole is still the whole. You're just looking somewhere else, but you still know the whole is right behind you. I think that's the coping phase. And when I say phase, it makes it sound like it's short. I think it's lifelong in some way. Without going down a long rabbit hole, I think the only way to manage that in the long term is to avoid getting stuck in that coping mechanism of distraction and start facing the hole. I tend to think of it as a spike. We all do, to lesser and greater extents, live with spikes up against our chest. We're quite nervous of them because they're sharp. And so we learn to maneuver around them, and we take a deep breath in and we move left and we move right, but we know that we go around the spike. We don't go into it. And that is safety. We don't want to get poked or stabbed by the spike, and that's totally normal. It's a metaphor for an emotion we want to avoid. But that does mean that we live our life moving around the spike. We are constrained. We don't do things, or we find situations very, very difficult, or we avoid experiences that other people don't. And that's not really where you want to be for the rest of your life if you can avoid it. But the only solution to that is a particularly counterintuitive one, which is that you have to take the spike into your chest and you have to feel the pain and drive it in and you drive it in and you drive it in. It feels so counterintuitive and so insane. And gradually the spike dissolves and dissolves and dissolves over time until the spike is part of you. It is inside you. It hasn't gone away, but it is incorporated inside of you. And you now have freedom of movement and you can go forwards and backwards in any way you wish you want because you've absorbed that. But that process is super counterintuitive and incredibly difficult. And I'm not suggesting I'm there. Most people never fully get there, but we can all do as much as we can. And I think that's the sort of counterintuitive thing. The distraction that you reference is absolutely right. It's a coping mechanism. But if you want to get past that, you end up having to face the hole or the spike or whatever metaphor more head on.
Yes.
Easier to say than do.
Much easier to say than do. For those who have been watching The Diplomat on Netflix and think that's what it is, what was being a diplomat for you in terms of roles and responsibilities?
Actually, the diplomat's job is twofold. It is when you are in a country to be a reporter. What is going on in the country that matters to the UK and write diplomatic telegrams back to the UK, particularly the foreign secretary and ministers, to tell them what's going on that's important.
Okay.
The second thing that happens is the ministers or senior people then write back to you and say, well, look, this thing that's going on is not really what we want. We'd actually rather it was something different. Please, could you go and change that thing in the interests of the UK? And then so your second role is to be a salesman and go and do that thing. And I say salesman because our levers are really, really weak. In the UK, you can pass legislation or you can tax people or whatever, and it does change behavior pretty quickly. If you're going to spend a lot of money on something, people tend not to do it unless they have to. Overseas, and in somebody else's country, you don't have those powers. Their government has those powers. You don't. And what therefore you rely on is negotiation, which is something for something. I'll give you this if you give me that. And influence. I won't give you anything, but please do it anyway. And for that, you have to convince somebody that it is in their interest and they just didn't realize it. You have very weak power to go and do that, but that's why diplomacy often happens over long, stretched out periods and why it doesn't make for a very good TV show, typically. People have tried. And that's why The Diplomat, as a TV show, has to resort to bringing in the CIA and a whole load of guns and explosions because that's faster and that makes better TV. Slow, stretched out negotiations tend not to make great TV.
Alexander, you've been all over the place. You were stationed in North Africa, Asia, the Middle East. You were in Ireland. You led crisis deployment teams to Nepal after the earthquakes in 2015. You met tribes in the Hindu Kush, spent time in Gaza to trauma assess staff. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. Yeah. Wow, you've really, really done your research. I'm very impressed. I didn't even know this was all out there.
Actually, and I can't remember where I found this now, actually. But during that time, I think you received several awards and commendations from the civil service. The Hindu Kush, I'm told it's one of the most beautiful places on earth and with some of the most hospitable people. But the Foreign Office today will advise against people travelling to large parts of it. What were you doing there and what was it like?
I was actually up there because I wanted to go and see it. There's no good reason, I'm afraid. A lot of the travel I did obviously was for important work reasons, but this wasn't. I wanted to see it because it is, I would say, the most beautiful part of Pakistan, but also one of the most beautiful places in the world. The Hunza Valley, where I was, in Chitral, is right where the three great mountain ranges of the Hindu Kush, the Karakorams, and the Himalayas meet. There's no other way of saying it than the mountains just fill the sky. The scale of these things is just unlike anything else that I've ever been to. And you stand like a speck of something in the valley with this just scale around you. And because it's really off the beaten track, time feels like it stands still there. People live in very traditional ways. Life moves quite slowly. People, as you say, are very friendly, with the exception of markings of the Taliban and stuff like that up there, which do exist. There's parts of which they claim influence in. And to get there, you have to take a plane from Islamabad, and that plane often doesn't get above the mountains. It flies through the valleys. So you bank around mountains. The pilots are ex-Pakistani Air Force. They can track around these things. And to land, you have to, I've never done it before or since, but the plane doesn't glide into the runway. It turns and drives down towards the ground. You fly at the ground.
Oh my.
And then it pulls up into the runway because it hasn't got the distance to do it at a slow arc. It has to do it fast. So it drives down and then flattens out and lands.
That's not for the faint-hearted.
That's why it's remote. is incredibly beautiful. It's an area incredibly beautiful and very, very friendly people, but also there's not a lot of Westerners up there. It's an unusual place. But that's one of the reasons I love the Foreign Office, because you get to explore respectfully, hopefully, but explore.
Yes. And of the many assignments that you had as a diplomat, is there one example you could give us that you're particularly proud of?
I'm most proud of over a longer period is working on the Middle East peace process in the Middle East. I wouldn't pretend for a second that I made a significant difference on it. It is a process where one generation of diplomats and wider society passes a baton to the next, and they have done for decades. But to be part of that chain, I think, is important. And the stakes are so high that it's worth fighting for. You don't always have to have, as we've said with teaching, a Damascene moment for something to be worth it. Sometimes it's chipping away at a wall, and eventually that wall will crack and crumble and the whole thing will fall down and people will be fated, go down as a generation in history. But they will only have done that because of the chipping away that generations of them did before. Who knows when the chipping will finally bring the wall down. I like and respect the idea of being part of a chain of people trying to do something important. I think there's a wider point for all of us that none of us are super powerful. We're unlikely to become president of the world, and we only have so much money and power and influence. So we have a teaspoon. But if you can put that teaspoon into the right ocean rather than the wrong ocean, I think that's a really powerful thing to do. All of us just try and do the best we can with the teaspoon we've got. And surprising when you got a lot of teaspoons. I feel like my metaphors are all over the place.
No, they're not. They're making complete sense to me. And for people thinking of going into the Foreign Office, is there any particular advice?
I'm a little out of date now because it was a while ago. I mean, back in the day, the thing is, the civil service fast stream was the route in. There are other routes in later. You can come in via other departments in the civil service, but it's hard, and it's definitely hard now. I think back when I was applying, I think this is still true, people overestimate speaking other languages or studying the right things. Ultimately, it was a blind set of tests. Your university, your score on your degree, your background was just all blanked out, and then you just did a battery of tests for 9 months until those who got through were offered a place. I think that's a good point for any job application you do. Look at the success criteria or the metric they're looking for and put all your efforts towards that. Try not to get swept up in the things you think might be important or the things you want to be important, which is really easy. I'd like to do 3 degrees in international relations. Might be good now, you're worth checking, but whatever it is, check it against the criteria for the job and then put all your efforts towards the criteria for the job, even if they're a bit less exciting or they're harder or they're less in your interest. You ultimately need to get over the test that any job requires of you, and training for it will make you more likely to pass that test. It just works.
You were there for how many years in the end in the Foreign Office?
About 10 years.
What made you decide that that was enough?
I think society is broadly changing. Very few people stay with one company forever now.
Yeah, that's true.
Also, the model is changing. Back in the day, your partner would accompany you overseas if you have one. Back in the day, they'd probably be a woman and they probably would go and run the residence while you did the diplomacy. And I generalize heavily there. That model is quite rightly and understandably dead. Most people's partners are lawyers in the city or, I don't know, work in PR. And it's hard to do that from Kazakhstan. And most families are 2 dual earners, because cost of living. If you're not in a long-term relationship, then that's quite hard as well, because you go across the world as a single person and you have to make friends and a community. And then every 3 or 4 years that gets ripped up and you go to the next place. And there's a real risk that your relationship with friends and family atrophy. It can become quite isolating. So I say there's challenges both ways in people's personal lives. And I think that model that used to exist is quite rightly dead, but it hasn't been yet replaced by another version that does make it easier. And I think a lot of people find that difficult. And I always felt, I think for my 20s and early 30s, it was a real no regrets move. Just go around the world and see some places and have some fun. But I never wanted to be living overseas later in life with all those difficult trade-offs, difficult relationships with friends and family and stuff. And I never felt that was quite right. it was right for a time. I felt like quite strongly. And so for a period, I went and worked in management consulting to give myself another string to my bow. And then I came back to the Foreign Office, and then I realized actually that it wasn't quite right for me. And it is still right for a lot of other people. And that's obviously, like everything in life, you have to work out the trade-offs, as long as you're clear-eyed about it.
Traitors. I'm sure you've heard that from Diplomat to Traitor. Ha ha. No one said that to you before.
No. People don't make the link as obviously as they kept asking me, as they should, as a diplomat, why is that going to make you good at the game? How are you going to bring that skill set in? Because that makes for a good piece on camera. And I just completely avoided answering it. I just kept on saying, well, I don't know that it will, if I'm honest. Probably the only thing I could say is it makes me relatively adaptable. I'll just have to figure it out, try and adapt when I get there, because most people who come in with a plan sort of struggle. And the reason I was worried about that is because, worries over the top, but tried to avoid the trap, which is everybody on the Traitors ends up with a split screen of them saying, I'm a firefighter, so I'm unbelievably good at sorting problems, or I'm a nurse, and therefore I'm brilliant with people. And that will cut straight to a scene where they're bawling at somebody in the face and screaming at them, or the sort of firefighter tripped over something on a mission and ended up in a bog of mud or something. The point is, it's just a massive hostage to fortune. So I tried to avoid it. The clever thing about, well, many clever things about the game is that it genuinely deals in the unexpected. You have a plan, it lasts for 3 or 4 hours, and then the game flips it on its head and everything goes up in the air and falls in a different way. And the only thing I think, or the major skill, is to try and adapt to a new circumstance. That's probably the single most important thing. So yeah, I tried to avoid the trap. I did well. It means that I didn't get the split screen.
Who or what gave you the idea to apply for it?
Yeah, a friend of mine had been saying for a while, actually. She's like, I think you'd really enjoy this. And I was like, I don't know, whatever. And I don't know why. I was sort of moving between roles, and I had a bit of time. I came, because as it happened, I came back from a flight from holiday on a Sunday evening, about 7 o'clock or something. This is actually a real sliding doors moment. I almost just went to bed. I was really, really tired. And I thought, no, you'll regret it. Just put in a video. So I put in this video. It was a funny video. I sort of dressed up partly in a suit and partly in a onesie.
We could do a video on anything.
Anything you want to say, anything you want to, within reason, I suppose, as long as it's legal.
Yeah.
And so I did the video and I submitted it, and then I collapsed into bed and I was like, oh, I never hear. Not in a negative way, but you're just like, chance of hearing are low. Because they just are. And then I got a call, and then it just kept going. And it was never really the thing that I was super exciting. And I genuinely loved the application process. I loved the people who were involved with the show. I loved the concept of the show. I loved the process. But at no point were all my chips on red that I was like, I must do this. I was just like, this is fun. And I hope it continues being fun. And if at any point they decide I'm not the right person, then that's okay too. And then it kept going. And then it kept going. And then I ended up doing it. I'd like to think that I tried to keep that approach for the show, because I almost threw myself off in episode 1. And I was like, well, that'll be all right too.
I can believe that, actually, because I watched the series when I knew I was speaking to you, and I loved it. It was not a hardship.
I'm so sorry. Speaking to me means you have to watch 12 hours of TV.
I watched the first episode and then I thought, oh my gosh, you're in it for like 2 minutes, because I actually did think how that spoke volumes for you and your fellow contestants, Fozia and Jack, because you go through all that process. Everyone's really excited to be there. And then within, just for those people who haven't seen it, you then are in carriages, and one person in each carriage has to either vote themselves or get voted off, and they're out of the game. So you put all that effort in, and then suddenly you're not going to be doing it anymore. And you did that very unselfishly, as did the other two. And I thought for a while, because I thought, why am I watching this series? Because you're not in it. And then you do come back in, which is great. I'm so glad you did, because that was rewarding the wrong behavior by rewarding the people who didn't volunteer and punishing the people who were generous enough to say, we'll take one for the team.
I agree on a sort of moral arc point. I don't know if The Traitors is that show that necessarily rewards good behavior, but I like the idea. It's funny because I watched every episode with 15 friends. It was a great period. I really loved it. It felt community-based. And when we were watching that first episode, obviously I knew what happened. And first of all, I think Fozia got off.
Yes.
And everyone in the room was like, what is she doing? That's insane. Why would you get... Oh, that's ridiculous. And then Jack got off and I was like, what an idiot. God, what is he doing? And this was me knowing that the next thing I do is chuck myself off. And everyone in the room was like, no, we really understand. You totally made a good decision. And you're like, it's too late for that, I'm afraid. I know what you think. You've been very, very clear.
When you did take yourself off, at what point did you know you were going to be going back?
A long time later, we found out that we would have a chance to come back, which of course we did via the cages. People have said to me, did you know that you'd have a chance to come back? Absolutely not. Well, I've got to be a bit careful with the language. The production stay completely out of it. The game is the game. You choose to play it how you play it. There's a lot of uncertainty and you play the best cards you've got in the way that you think is best, and that's it. They let it run. That said, not completely crazy. When the announcement on the train came that somebody would have to get off, I thought about it pretty hard. I listened to the announcement very carefully. It was pretty clear that they said that there wasn't enough space on the train to go to the castle, not that you wouldn't go.
Oh, that's clever.
I knew that nobody from the previous series had ever left without being murdered or banished, and this was neither. And I also figured that the first few episodes are always messy, and you don't necessarily want to be in amongst that mess. So there was an element of calculated risk in it where I was like, well, I don't know what will happen next, but it may not be the worst thing in the world. Actually, it was pretty bad because when I came back with a chance coming in, clearly they did take, in the end, poor Jack, who's a great guy, that he ended up going in what was a pretty unfair way, in a way, because he wasn't murdered or banished. He's the first person in the show ever to go without being murdered or banished. So that takes that argument out. And for me, 2 carries had 8 people, 1 had 10. I think it's right to say that everybody or everybody but one who left by that point that I came back was from my carriage. So I had 3 people available from my carriage who was in my corner trying to get me down from this cage. It was so unfortunate. The others had like 8 and I had 3 I'd sacrificed myself for them, and it became quite tribal. Your carriage were your people. And so again, I was just unbelievably fortunate. This is genuinely just a stroke of fortune. The 3 people in my carriage really did an unbelievable job in getting me back in because they ran around like dervishes to get these coins. And also a few other people joined in as well. But again, coin flip moments from another world, that would have gone a very different way. So it's funny how things happen. Honestly, it is. I guess if it had happened, you'd never know. But talk about sliding doors.
Yes, absolutely. And when you reflect on it now, was it a great experience?
At the time, I liked on the show. I enjoyed it so much. It was so much fun. It was tough. You were on all the time. And I mean, all the time. Even in the breaks, you are still on. And you're always thinking about the game. And because the game changes so quickly, you have to be very quick to react. I loved it. I absolutely loved every minute. And I feel like I played it with the cards I had, as well as I could have played them. And it didn't work out quite at the end, but such is life.
Once you were back in, you were there right until virtually. Well, I probably shouldn't even be saying because people will be wanting to watch it. It is a fantastic game. You have faithfuls and you have 3 traitors. And the aim of the game is that the faithful banish the traitors before they get murdered. And the way in which that happens is unbelievably entertaining. But I have to say, I thought you came across really, really well because some people were incredibly passionate to the point of being rude and taking it all very personally. And you were very good at just being kind always, calm, civil. Even when you were in the line of fire, you didn't rise to any offensive needling. As a viewer, you have the music and you have the pauses and it's all incredibly dramatic. So being actually there, is it hard not to become so angry and distraught and get sucked in?
I can't speak for like any particular viewer, but I can speak for me. It was hundreds of times more pressurized inside than it was out. Watching that round table is pretty stressful. Being a part of it is factors more stressful.
Wow. Okay.
The whole day is set up towards that round table and who's going to be banished. And everything up to that point is positioning as to where you are versus others. And some of it is defense of why it's not me, and some of it's offense of why it's somebody else. And you spend the whole day maneuvering in this very complicated group of, say, 20 people to figure out where you stand and how you best position yourself. And things change very, very quickly, like that example. And then that all builds up to the round table. And that's where the payoff comes of whatever maneuvering you've done of the day. Did it work? And waiting to go to that round table. And then you walk in that line to the round table and you sit down and then you have a silence and you look at everybody across the table and you know somebody's going to go. And it lasts obviously a lot longer than you see on TV, but not a minute of that sags. It is all electric. So no, being there is something else.
Wow.
One quick thought I felt in the game is that it's difficult to know which comes first. You go psychologically off balance and then you get banished or murdered, or you get murdered and then because you're psychologically off balance. My view is people tend to leave the game when they get knocked off balance emotionally. And that happens to everybody at some point, but can you recover? Can you be logical? Can you absorb the emotion and still play a good game? Or do you get knocked off balance? You overcorrect by being aggressive, or you overcorrect by going too hard at somebody else and look suspicious, or go too hard with too much defense of yourself and therefore look suspicious. Whatever it is, if you get knocked off balance emotionally, that's often a precursor to leaving. Part of the game is staying emotionally balanced and therefore nimble to move left, to move right. A little bit like we were talking about the spike earlier. If you overreact to something, you put yourself at significant risk. Call back again to earlier, some of it's that emotional battery. You have an emotional battery which lets you absorb different emotions going around. When that battery starts to run low, and I think it did for all of us at some point, that's when you're at great risk because you're no longer able to be emotionally intelligent, to stay light on your feet emotionally. You overreact, and that's when you put yourself at risk. So this is a funny one. I think the emotion comes before the exit generally.
Yes. Well, you seemed remarkably calm and civilized the whole way through. So if you weren't feeling that, you did a really good job of disguising it.
I definitely felt pressure for sure. But it's a funny sort of pressure, isn't it? Because it's a game. You can afford to risk going out on episode 1 because it's a game. I didn't want to go out. I wanted to stay in it and do it. And brackets, I was incredibly lucky. I got to play in so many of the interesting set pieces of the game. I was there for the cages, for the death match, waking up in a coffin, the seer thing where I tried to give Frankie the coins. There were so many interesting set pieces that, I was quote lucky enough to be part of, thanks to the Traitors for sending me into them. I love that. There's pressure in making them good decisions, of reacting well, not responding badly. But it's all the game. Obviously, it's a game.
Are you still in touch with the group? Because that is such a massive experience and that must be quite bonding.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think like anything that's an emotional crucible, or that has a heat of that crucible, which it does in its particular way, it's incredibly bonding. We're incredibly close. We all went away for an Airbnb weekend after the show together. We have a WhatsApp group that pings constantly. It's quieter now because it's been a little time, but there was a time when it's hundreds of messages a day. And then the funny thing is that cuts across series as well. You meet people from series 1. You don't have to say, oh, I'm Alexander and hi, this and this and this. You meet and you're just like, yes, I know because I was there too.
Yes.
There's instant shared understanding. The weird thing is the celebrity version with people who are obviously stars. I've met a few of those as well. And it's the same thing. I met Joe Marlowe the other day and I was like, oh my God, you, how was it? Oh my goodness, what was that like? What was that like? And you're straight into it.
That's lovely.
Obviously, I don't know Joe Marlowe from the next person, but there is such an obvious shared thing there.
Yes. What falls out of that is that you become famous overnight, and not just famous, a heartthrob. And so how have you coped with this new persona? I remember someone saying about being famous that said you stay the same when you're famous, but everyone else around you changes.
Oh, that's a really interesting thing, a nice pithy way to say it. The sort of foothills of being known, right? It's really worth remembering that it's all loaned, not bought. You can get good press one day and you'll get terrible press the next. Neither are totally true. You're just still exactly as you said, you're the same person you were before and you'll be the same person afterwards as long as you don't muck it up. And what you really want to make sure is you're still be a good person to your friends and you stick close to your friendship groups, and none of that should or could change. Keep steady as they go. Your point, I think, is right that some other people, not those close to you typically, do change. And most people are lovely. They're great. They love the show. They're huge fans of the show. And I can't stress that enough. The show, the production company who make it are phenomenal. It's brilliantly produced. You could put broadly anyone on it. It'd be fantastic. And I love that about it. I love that it connects people. People talk about it at the water cooler at work. People watch it with their teenage son or daughter. There are very few shows that are intergenerational.
That's
I
true.
love that connection. And so if people come up on the street, they're like, oh my God, you're in this thing. Yeah, that's really nice. It's really nice that it connects people. Very small percentage of that is a bit less like that. But broadly, people have been very, very nice. And I love that connectedness. Obviously, it is a bit different at times as well.
Nothing weird happen
A
little bit.
Sometimes, but broadly, people love the show.
Okay. You've been doing an awful lot of things since Traitors. You were DJing on Classic FM. You had your own show, which was Trust Me, It's a Classic.
I know. Literally just after Jonathan Ross.
Oh my goodness, you're after him.
Yes, I know.
And now he is following in your footsteps because he's now on the Traitors.
Yes. Yeah, exactly that. He probably saw that and thought, I need a piece of that. Yeah, that would make perfect sense.
Of course he did. Was that nerve-wracking or enjoyable?
I loved it. I mean, I guess if you're willing to put yourself on camera for reality TV, then you can't really draw the line at radio and say that's a bit much. So I had a great time. I absolutely loved it. Radio is a funny one, though, because a lot of people get their energy from interacting with other people. And radio, the people you're interacting with are separated by wires, cables, and hundreds of miles. Traitors, for sure, you are interacting with people all the time, and the emotions come very naturally and the engagement comes very naturally. But you have to reconnect to that when you're in a room just staring at the ceiling. That was very different. As an experience, I loved it. Not just because of the presenting bits and classical music, which I'm a big fan of, but also I got to write my own script and I really enjoyed putting some of myself into that. I would ask the producers, do you have anything from the Middle East that I could put in? Or pieces that I'd heard while I was in Palestine or whatever. And there's not a ton of classical music from out there. And then that's a hook for talking about the markets of cities across the Middle East or whatever it is. And that becomes more personal. So I really enjoyed being able to link the two together.
You're an ambassador for Mencap. You were going to do the Great Northern Run. Has that happened? Have you done that yet?
I've done it about a month and a half ago, or 2 months ago. It was a half marathon in aid of Mencap, raising money to support their work and also to raise awareness.
And also, because of the Traitors, you raised £90,000 for Mencap, which was just extraordinary. So you've been doing a lot of work in that space.
Just to add on that, I think that is now actually over 100K. And the only reason I say that is because it was more than the total prize pot for the entire show.
Yes.
Which was split between two people. So that's incredible. People raised more than the whole winnings of the show for a charity I care very much about. That is literally just a different version of winning, isn't it? So people were incredible.
I've actually been really enjoying some of the clips that you've made, which is talking about current affairs. You've been interviewing Sir Keir Starmer. Talk us through a little bit of that, because I've really enjoyed you distilling what's going on in the world, making it very digestible for people to understand both sides without putting your spin on it, just explaining, which I think there's a real gap in the market for that. So anyway, just explain what you're up to right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've explained it better than I could, really. That's the aim. I think I was going to say the world, but particularly social media is a very tribal place. People have very strong opinions about things. Generally, the louder you are, the more opinionated, maybe the more views it drives, or at least that's common conception. I'm not sure many people love how that is shaping society. And so I am really interested in trying to put out content that I know about, which is foreign affairs, which I do, but in a way that means people can make up their own minds about things. It's my job to explain what's going on and give them framing of being like, this, or some people say this, some people say that. There's your frame. And then people can make up their own minds where they sit on it. That's not for me to do. And why would I want to tell people what to think? But I think giving people more understanding of what I think are incredibly important events that do affect all of our lives is a super important thing to do. So I really enjoy doing that.
I really enjoyed watching and listening to that.
That's very kind. And then ditto with the Prime Minister, the reason for doing it is to try and ask the questions that I think matter to people, to let them hear directly from somebody who gets to make all those decisions.
Yes, you have that platform now, which I'm sure you will continue to have, to be able to talk to these people and find out.
Funny old world, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great. So that's where you're focusing your time and effort right now.
Yes.
Fantastic. In this eventful life that you have had, Alexander, just one thing. It comes from the late Michael Mosley, who was a fellow New College alumnus and former guest on the show. And he would do just one thing, which would be like 15 minutes, have a cold shower or breathe slowly or whatever. Just one thing, piece of advice to people going about their daily lives.
Goodness, I haven't thought about it. But one that comes to mind is process, not outcome. Just can't affect a lot of what happens that's outside your control. Take a job interview, which we discussed earlier. You can't decide if you get the job, only the panel can do that. What you can affect is the process. So have you revised for the interview? Have you thought about the questions? Have you had a good night's sleep? This kind of stuff. And therefore put your energy into the process, control what you can control. And that's comforting because you know that you're controlling what you can control and not worrying about what you can't, which is uncomfortable. And it's also sensible and practical because that's where you can make the biggest impact by pulling levers that you've got control of. So I would say process, not outcome. The outcome takes care of itself. Get the process right.
Great advice. As I've been researching, you've been described as kind, humble, a peacemaker. You've been a carer, a teacher, a diplomat. So those traits are critical in those roles. And you seem to be sufficiently grounded that fame and celebrity aren't luring you away from those core values. So I shall be looking with huge interest at the next twists and turns in your life and wishing you all the happiness and success that you so deserve. And you've been awesome, Alexander, for talking to me today. Thank you so, so much.
No, thank you so much for having me on. It's quite cathartic, isn't it? You get to talk about all these things and think about them in new ways.
You've been listening to Bandwidth Conversations. Thanks to Anna B., Head of Marketing, to all of the podcast consultant, to Bagawire for the music, to the Money Maze podcast. Thank you for listening. Any feedback, please email me, katie@bandwidthconversations.com. Please sign up on our website, www.bandwidthconversations.com, so we can notify you about new podcast releases. We hope to see you again soon.